This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. In today's episode, I had the pleasure of talking to a former professional basketball player, serial author and YouTuber Dre Baldwin. Dre's written 27 books. That's right, 27 books. One of which is Playing as Well as You Practice. So today, we dig into that topic. And let's be honest, whether you're a talented and motivated youngster or a professional athlete, it is a challenge to free yourself up in a tournament or a match, to have an aggressive mindset when things aren't quite going right or when you're out of form. Often people can have perfectionist tendencies, so they find this a big struggle. So yeah, we're going to talk about that in this episode and how you can go about developing a confident and resilient mindset when you are under pressure. Hi Dre, could you tell the listeners a little bit about your background and your interest in the mental side of sport and mental toughness specifically?
Sure, David. Well, thanks for having me on, first of all. My background is in sports. I was always into sports growing up, played a little bit of American football, and then some baseball. Eventually found my way over to basketball around the age of 14, which is actually pretty late if you are wanting to go somewhere in the sport. Not if you want to play for fun. If you want to play in college, let alone in the pros, that's pretty late to be 14 just starting the sport. But that's what it was for me. I didn't make my high school team until I was a senior, my last year in high school. Didn't really play that much. And then in college, I had to walk on, meaning I had no scholarship. I wasn't invited. Nobody knew me, none of the coaches, anything. But I was able to just literally walk into the gym and earn my way onto the team. And I played in college, but I was still playing at the Division III level, which is the third tier of college sports. So it's not like professional teams are looking at the Division III schools looking for talent. They're looking at Division I. So when I got out of college, I still wanted to play pro, but I didn't have any job prospects. So my first year out of school, I did not play basketball. I was just working some jobs. I worked at a mall. I worked at a fitness center selling memberships. Then that next year, that's when I went to an exposure camp, which is basically a job fair for athletes. I played well at that exposure camp, and that's how I connected with an agent, and that's how I started my pro career. So at the same time, I took the footage from that exposure camp and I put it on this new website called YouTube that let you put up as much content for free as you wanted. So that's where I started to build an audience online. And the funny thing is, David, I built more people know me from YouTube videos than know me from actually being a professional athlete. So it's just funny. You do all that work to become a pro athlete, but everybody knows you from the internet. So while I'm making those videos on YouTube, it was just a random, sporadic. I'll put them up whenever I felt like it, because there was no business opportunity behind putting up YouTube videos in 2005, 6, 7, none of those at that time. But around 2009, I had found myself unemployed. I was a free agent from professional basketball. And at the same time, I'm asking myself, well, how can I get some control over my career? So I really started focusing a little bit more on those videos and blogging and my website and what we now call personal brand. Because one of the things that players had been asking me who were watching me on YouTube was, Dre, they would ask me things like, what makes you go to the gym every day to practice? Or how do you have the same confidence in a game that you have when you're practicing by yourself? Everybody's watching you. How do you not have performance anxiety? Or they would ask, how did I maintain that vision of trying to become a pro athlete even when things were not working in my favor? I wasn't getting on the teams. I wasn't being recruited. I didn't have a job offer coming out of college. How did I maintain the mentality to keep trying? Or how I got started getting online. How do you get started? How do you play overseas if nobody's recruiting you? How do you actually drum up some interest in yourself and sell yourself? So when I started talking about those aspects, things like discipline and confidence and mental toughness and personal initiative, that's when I started hearing from people who weren't even athletes, and they would say, well, Dre, I'm not trying to learn how to play basketball from you, but the way that you talk about mindset and things like mental toughness and confidence and discipline, that stuff applies to everybody. So that planted a seed in my mind, David, that I could take just that element and I could give it to the whole world. I didn't have to limit myself to an audience of basketball players. So that's, hopefully I'm answering your question. I tend to forget the question once I start getting into the answer to it. So that's how I got started in talking about mindset and things like mental toughness.
Okay, no, I like that. Out of interest, you say you started at 14 years old. What's your take on it now with youngsters today? Because they started, 5, 6 years old in some sports. Do you think it's too young, or what's your thoughts?
No, it's funny because as an athlete now, if I was able to go back, I would probably say I wish I started sooner, right? Because you just look at the results and I say, okay, well, if I started 4 years earlier, 5, 10 years earlier, then I just would have got a lot better, a lot faster. But who knows what would have happened? It's kind of like the butterfly effect. Then I would have had to undo some of the other things that I was doing in that time period. And maybe the story wouldn't even be exactly the same. So it's easy to say that. Now, looking back in a vacuum, had I just started earlier, everything would have been perfect and I would have been a lot better. But again, you're not even factoring in those other aspects that we tend to forget. Looking back, we don't even remember some of the other elements that might have played a role in why it worked out exactly the way that it did. So I know a lot of parents of athletes or athletes who become parents, they just want to give their kid everything they didn't have. So I started at 8 years old, you're going to start at 2 years old, but it doesn't always work out that way because maybe the child doesn't even want to play sports. Maybe the parent is a little bit too overbearing. Maybe the child, they get their fill of the sport within 10 years and now they're 12, they don't want to play sports anymore. So you never know how it's actually going to work out. I think what I've heard many parents say is that there's no right answer. And every time you think you have the right answer, you realize it's not the right answer. So I think every human is unique, even children. So even though you might have the idea that they're going to become this and that, the child might have different ideas. And hopefully a good parent will let the child become what they want to become.
Yeah, most definitely. And you seem to be a serial writer. You've got about 27 books, I think it is. One of the books I'd like to dig into a little bit in more detail would be the playing as well as you practice. So I see that a lot where, be it children or adults, they struggle with that. They can train and practice really well, but then get them in a match situation and it all goes pear-shaped.
Right.
Did you see that yourself when you played?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's the reason why I wrote the book. So every book that I've written is because I had some kind of challenge with that exact thing. So all I'm doing, anything that I write, or even when I put out free material, all I'm doing is giving the answer that I didn't have. So now that I got the answer, now I'm going to be give it to everybody else. I figured this out. Let me help you out so you don't have the same problem. So playing as well as you practice was one of my biggest challenges in sports, because when one of the biggest things that a lot of athletes don't think about, and I think a lot of parents don't think about when their child is coming up as an athlete, is not just the practice, because these days, there are so many trainers for every sport and there are programs and, here's the workout you can do. You can get it off the internet. But the biggest thing is once the athlete has developed the skills, or while you're developing the skills, you need game experience. So you know what it feels like to actually use those skills in a live situation that's not controlled. An uncontrolled situation, it's open situation. So for example, these days I like to do a boxing training, and my boxing trainer, we are doing the drills and hitting the mitts and this combination, that combination. But every once in a while he'll just break off from the combination and he'll just start throwing punches, and it's like, and I don't always react the right way. And he's like, well, see, in a real match, that's how it's going to be. Like, it's not going to be coordinated. Like, all right, throw this punch, then that punch. And it's the same thing in every other sport, is that you can practice the skills all you want, but you need that experience of actually performing in the game. So in that book, How to Play as Well as You Practice, I help people with two things. One aspect is the mindset aspect of getting yourself mentally prepared for the fact that you're going into an uncontrolled situation and you're going to have to respond instinctively. You're not going to have time to think about what to do. And the second thing is understanding that this book is telling you things, but you need to go out there and actually get live game experience. You need to get your butt kicked every now and then so that you know what it feels like, you know that you can survive it, and then you can get better in those live situations. But as they say, real life alters the lab test. So no matter what you're doing in life, sports or anything else, you have to get experience actually doing the live thing. Practicing is good, but practicing is only half the game. You have to get out there and actually do it so that you can see how you respond to it and get used to responding in the moment instinctively to the randomness that you're going to get from other people.
I'll take you back to one of the points you mentioned about the thinking side and how, when you're training, you need to be in autopilot, if you like, when you're actually going into a match situation there. So how do you stop that overthinking when you're out there on the court or on the pitch or wherever it is?
Great question. So the first thing is you got to prepare. Prepare as well as you could possibly prepare so that you have all your skills in place. You have your tools in place. When you are thinking or when you are in practice, you actually are doing things the way they need to be done. This is the reason why we practice, right? So as they say, perfect practice makes perfect performance. So you do want to practice. I'm not devaluing the value of practice. I mean, after all, I am the guy who says work on your game. So do have all the practice in place so that you have the skills in place. The second thing is your question is how to not overthink. By the time you get to performance time, you shouldn't be thinking at all. So any amount of thinking is overthinking when you get into the performance. And the reason why I say that is because in a live performance, especially in something like sports where you have competition and you have other people trying to beat you, and in a sport like, let's say, basketball or soccer or boxing, you have someone trying to stop you, right? So unlike, let's say, running or golf where the opponent can't do anything to hinder you, but in those sports, the opponent can actually play defense and stop you. Any moment that you take to think about what you're going to do, the opportunity is gone. By the time the message travels from your brain to your body to actually do it, the opportunity is not there anymore. So you have to be trained to respond instinctively to whatever happens around you. That's the biggest thing about not overthinking. You shouldn't be thinking at all. You should be completely blank, just going off of instinct. And the third thing is, as I talked about a moment ago, you have to get the experience, because the first time that you try to do this is probably not going to work out. There are a few exceptions, people who just have just natural talent and ability and just comes naturally and they can respond in a moment and they don't need a lot of training for doing it. But most of us, the normal amongst us, we have to get that live experience and get your ass kicked a couple times where things are not working the way that you thought they would based on the way that you practiced it. It didn't work out that way in the game. You need to get that experience under your belt so that, again, internally you understand that even when it doesn't go your way, you can survive. Like, you didn't die. You lost, but you didn't die. And then, all right, now that you saw what happened, can you come back and adjust so that you're ready to respond to that the next time that you see it? Especially in sports, every athlete has to go through that. But in any level of performance, everybody has to go through that in order to become great at what they do.
Yep, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because when you think of like some sports, they're really technical, and you've got to, as you say, you've got to really train hard and put in the 10,000 hours, if you like, to perfect, or try to perfect those skills. Perfection doesn't exist in my book. But then the anxiety that can come with that, if you take that mindset into actually on the court in a pressure situation, do you want to share with the listeners a little bit more about that performance anxiety?
Yeah, so a lot of athletes have that issue. And the reason that I wrote that book is I realized that a lot of athletes had that issue, because a lot of athletes would, even from the very beginning, when I first started putting content out, athletes would just say, well, Dre, I see that you're good at practicing. I see you practicing. I would be in an empty gym by myself. Like, a lot of players would be on the court by themselves practicing. But they would say their challenge was, well, when I get into the game, all this stuff that I practice, I'm not doing it. Or I get nervous, or I get the ball and I just freeze up and I'm not doing anything. Or again, this happens off the court as well. Somebody practices their perfect sales presentation, then they get into the room with all the people they're trying to sell to, and they don't say the same stuff that they said in their practice. So I realized that a lot of athletes have performance anxiety, and whether that's in the form of nervousness, maybe they're not nervous at all, but for whatever reason, those skills are not coming to them on call the same way. So the formula for getting over that performance anxiety, again, is, and we're going to keep coming back to the same theme here, David, is you got to get the live experience. You have to get out there and actually do it. There's only so much you can simulate a certain experience in life. You have to actually have that experience. And the more you get that experience under your belt, the better you'll be at dealing with things as they happen, because you can't predict other human beings. We like to think that we can, but most of the time you can't. You have no idea what another person is going to do, especially in a sporting competition. So you have to get into those situations, but at the same time, have the practice in place so that you have the tools, you have the skills to call on. You just have to get good at instinctively calling on those skills when they're needed. But you can't get that by just thinking about it or watching it on TV or listening to somebody else talk about it, or even from reading a book. Because the things that I tell people in that book is you still have to go out and actually do these things. Don't think just because you read my words that all of a sudden you're going to play good in the game. You need to take what I'm telling you, then go use it and apply it the way that I'm telling you to apply it so that you can go perform in the game. But that performance anxiety thing is a big thing for a lot of people. As a matter of fact, David, I was just talking to one of my clients the other day. He's not an athlete, but he was just talking about public speaking. Now, he's successful in his industry, but when he gets up in front of a room and he wants to speak, his voice gets all squeaky. He gets nervous. He's sweating. That's performance anxiety as well. It's just, even when you're good at what you do, some people just get anxious when they know they're being watched and they're being observed, because they have this whole conversation going on in their mind about what's happening. And one of the things that I tell people in my book, Work on Your Game, I talk about this, is that if there are a whole bunch of people watching you doing what you do, you should be happy that they're watching you. Don't feel nervous or anxious that they're watching you. Be happy that they're watching you, because they came to see a show. They came to see you do what you do well. And that's the reason why they're in the stands and you're on the stage or on the court doing what you do. They want to see you perform. So
ultimately, in that situation, you're trying to change the story in somebody's head about
absolutely,
about the way the reason why they are presenting or whatever. Mm-hmm. Going back to the practice side of things. So golf's one of the sports that I work with quite a few people, and like the technical training or technical practice seems to be a huge thing for many golfers, and they'll stand there and they'll have 5, 6, 10 swing thoughts. Surely that is not going to help when it comes down to being in that uncontrolled environment. Ultimately, I realize you've got to do that up to a point, but it's got to be a small amount of your practice.
So, what was the last part of the question?
I'm saying the technical practice where you're trying to perfect the skill. You've got 5, 10 swing thoughts or whatever it is on the golf course. On the driving range. Is only going to get you so far. So, like, what other ways can people go about their practice? And this doesn't necessarily just have to be golfers.
Oh yeah, well they have to get out there in actual competition and suffer the defeat, suffer the embarrassment, suffer the butt kicking that's going to happen when you realize that practicing in a controlled environment is not enough to be good in the game. That's what people have to go through. So let's just say a boxer. You're in a boxing training and you have a trainer and you're hitting the mitts and you're doing your shadow boxing and your combinations and you're hitting the punching bag, and you like Mike Tyson when you're hitting the punching bag, right? And you put that on YouTube so everybody's impressed by you. But then you get in an actual boxing match and somebody kicks your ass in 2 minutes because you're not used to getting hit back, right? Punching bags don't hit back. So that's the experience that we have to go through, and you can go through that even in your training. If you have a good trainer, your trainer can maybe set you up for that situation. I don't know if you saw did you see the Tiger Woods documentary I think it was on HBO?
I've seen a few different documentaries on Tiger Woods. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I've seen that particular one, but tell me about it anyway.
So in that documentary, they would show when Tiger was a kid, maybe a teenager, he'd be practicing, and his dad taught him how to golf. He would be like, he'll yell while Tiger was in his backswing, or he'd drop a golf club, or he'd walk across his line when he was about to putt. And all of those things, the reason why his dad was doing that is to harden him and toughen him up to understand, listen, in a live situation, not everybody's just going to sit there and be quiet while you take your shot, even though that's what they're supposed to do. I'm going to over prepare you for everything that could possibly happen, so that when you get into the real situation, nothing could possibly happen that's going to throw you off of your game. That was the point of the way Tiger's dad, Earl, was training him to be prepared for golf. And clearly it worked out. Now, his son has some talent as well, but he put him in a position that he had to take those losses in practice so that he wouldn't take so many losses in the game. You look at another example, somebody like Michael Jordan. He always talked about, I'm sure, let me not assume. Did you see the Michael Jordan documentary last year? Yeah. Everybody saw that, right? So one of the things Michael Jordan always talked about was that, and he said this years back, this documentary wasn't the first time he said it. He said, I always tried to make practice harder than the game. And what is he saying? He's saying, I'm going to put myself in tougher positions in practice behind closed doors, and my teammates in tougher positions in the practice gym than anything we're going to see in the game. So then when something tough happens in the game, we've already seen it before. Whereas an athlete who doesn't do that to themselves, when they get into the game and that's a situation they've never seen before, or it's tougher than they've ever been in before, it's more uncomfortable than they've ever been, they can't respond to it because they've never seen it. So now they have to learn on the job. Whereas a professional, they prepare ahead of time. Every professional in every job does their preparation before the event occurs. Whereas amateurs, they do their learning during the event. But the problem with that is you might lose while you're trying to learn during the event. And in life, you may not get but so many opportunities. You take look at someone like Floyd Mayweather, the boxer. He went undefeated in boxing, but I'm sure he got some bloody noses and he took some hard punches in practice. I guarantee that he did. Even though he was very talented, obviously, and very skilled, I'm sure he took some defeats, we'll just say defeats, quote unquote, in practice. That's why he was not being defeated in the live events, because he prepared himself ahead of time. One of my coaches in college, for example, my sophomore year of college, one of the things he would say every day was that my job as a coach is to make you so uncomfortable in practice that nothing that happens in the games makes you uncomfortable. That was the goal. Now, I'm not sure we had enough talent for that to work out because our team wasn't that great that year, but he had the right idea. I want to make you as uncomfortable as possible in preparation so that in a live situation, nothing's going to throw you off.
Yeah, and ultimately that's going to develop a resilient athlete, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. Or it's going to destroy them, or they'll crumble, one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In individual sports, I would think it's probably going to be a little bit tougher than what it is in a team sport in some ways, because you've got to maybe take the initiative and own your training. And let's be honest, it is quite easy to get quite comfortable as a human being. Right.
And in an individual sport, it could go either way, but it's heavier either way, right? Because in an individual sport, everything's on you. There are no teammates to blame, but at the same time, there are no teammates to lean on. So in a team sport, a player could maybe not be feeling their best that day, but their team can still win because you could depend on your teammates to pick up the slack. But in an individual sport, let's say boxing, if you're not feeling great, you can't pass the ball to somebody else to box the next round for you. Like either you get off the stool or you don't. Whereas in basketball, for example, I might not be in my best shape. Let's say I have a hurt ankle or my knee's bothering me. I can still be on the court. I might not be able to do my best, but I can get the ball to my teammates. And if they're making shots, my team can still be successful that day. So in team sports, you can kind of lean on your teammates, but in individual sport, there's nothing to lean on. It's just you.
Yeah, so you've got to develop a mentality where you're constantly challenging yourself, and I suppose you build a team around you who are going to challenge you when you're going through those difficult moments.
Right, or can help you.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Right.
So, going back to your point about putting yourself out there and going into match situations on a regular basis, no matter what, that's obviously going to take some commitment level. And you've got to try and get over the fear of failure, embarrassment, shame, all of those things. So what advice would you give to an athlete who's in maybe that situation, where they're in a bad run of form, things aren't going right, and they're getting in their own heads?
Well, one of the best things is to not put yourself in a situation where you have to sit around and stew on that, and you're just sitting around and marinating in that negative energy, because all that's going to do is take you further down that path. So it's, first of all, preparing yourself ahead of time. And is some of the same themes. It's preparing yourself ahead of time for the fact that you are going to be challenged. And in your training, depending on who your trainer or your coach is or who your teammates are, is getting yourself in, sometimes maybe putting yourself in the position of failing in your training, facing failure in your practice, so that when this kind of situation comes up in a game situation, you're not thrown completely off and you don't just crash and burn. And again, it goes back to what Michael Jordan talked about, that principle is making it so hard in practice so that when something crazy happens in the game, you're not bothered. And even his coach, Phil Jackson, when, I don't know if you're a big basketball fan, but in the days of when Phil was coaching the Bulls and even the Lakers later on, if the team, usually in basketball, if the other team goes on a run, they score 5, 10 points in a row and the crowd's going crazy, the coach usually calls timeout and gets everybody gathered up and tries to regroup. But Phil Jackson wouldn't call timeout. His team would be giving up 10 points in a row, and and the players would all be looking at the coach because they think he's going to call timeout, because that's what every other coach does. And Phil Jackson would just be sitting there and he'd just be looking back at them like, okay, what you going to do? And the reason why he would do that is so that they would be battle tested and they would be tough enough to understand, okay, the other team just scored 10 points in a row on us. Don't look at the coach to save us. Let's figure this out. Let's gather ourselves and get ourselves back together. And he was helping the team develop mental toughness and learn to look at themselves instead of looking at the coach whenever things went crazy, because, he's just the coach. He's not playing. It's the guys on the court. And Phil Jackson was a very successful coach. Now, he had talented players, of course, but those same talented players had been playing before he got there and they weren't successful. or at least winning championships successful. So to answer your question, it's in your training. That's all part of the training. It's to prepare yourself ahead of time for what could possibly happen in the games. If you're seeing something for the first time in the live event, that means that's a failure of your training. That's not a failure of the game. That's a failure of your training, because somebody who should have helped you prepare for that thing to occur, clearly that was an oversight on their part, that they didn't get you ready for this thing that absolutely could happen. Because look, it's happening right now. They should have got you ready for that before you came out here in front of everybody when the money was on the line, so to speak. So I think that's all part of preparation. And I think a professional is always prepared ahead of time.
Would you say visualization's a very useful skill in that respect as well, to be able to prepare yourself?
100%. Now, to visualize at the same time, though, David, you need someone around you who actually can help you visualize what you need to visualize. Because let's say I've never been in situation X before. So how can I visualize it? I can't, because I don't even know situation X exists. But if my trainer knows that it exists, they can help me get ready for it. So you got to have the right people around you, like you said earlier.
Yeah, hugely. No, it's definitely something I advocate, is visualizing yourself in really difficult situations and how you feel, and then how you're going to respond to that. And it definitely works well. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Dre, and I'm wondering if you can give 3 takeaways to the listeners based around the theme that we've discussed.
Sure. Number 1, and this is one I've said many times, so I think people might already got it, but I'll say it again. A professional is always prepared ahead of time. No professional shows up to a situation and is seeing something for the first time. I don't care if you're a professional speaker, if you're an author, if you're a salesperson, if you're an athlete, you are prepared ahead of time for everything that could possibly occur. Doesn't mean you're going to be perfect at it, but you're not surprised by anything. Professional is never surprised in a moment of performance. Number 2 is, in your preparation, you want to get yourself ready for everything that could possibly come up. So, for example, you ever see the TV show Shark Tank on ABC? Entrepreneurs try to sell their business. Okay, so
seen similar programs.
They have similar ones in different countries, but there's a show where entrepreneurs come on the show and they present their business and they try to get an investment, or they try to sell their company to these people with a lot of money. And the thing is, the entrepreneurs, the sharks, they will start asking this person questions. So I'm standing there and there's 6 guys who have all this money, and they start hitting me with questions. So how much does it cost to get a customer? How much are you spending on advertising? How much money are you making on this? What's your revenue? They ask all these questions. And what would happen sometimes is that the entrepreneur who's trying to sell their business or get an investment, they would get hung up on a question. They would not have an answer to a question. And the sharks would just be looking at them crazy. Like, man, you got all the way here to this TV show and you can't answer a question about your own business. So what are you doing? How'd you even get here? And the thing is, the people who are most successful on that show were not necessarily because they had the best business. It's because they had answers to the questions. They knew their business. They understood what was happening and they knew what was coming. So they were ready for it ahead of time. So this is another form of preparation. And the third thing that I would tell people is, you have to get out there and get active. Even though we know we've had the lockdowns, pandemic, whatever you want to call it, over the last year plus, and we're all on Zooms and we're using our live streaming and our apps and our phones because maybe you're nervous about being around human beings. If you're going to be a professional and a high level performer in this life, you have to get out of the house. Now, you can't do it all through your phone. You can't do it all virtually. You have to go out to where people are actually at, and you have to be there in the fire. You got to jump in the crucible and you have to deal with it. That's the only way that you're going to be ready to deal with quote unquote real life that alters the lab test, because it may feel like a lab test when you're just doing everything virtually and preparing and everything is controlled and set to your settings. But you got to go out there to where things are random. Nobody really cares about how you practice and how you prepared and what you were expecting. They're going to throw it at you how they throw it at you. And if you can't respond to that, then you're probably not going to win. And what I like to tell people is that controlled environment is not always going to be in place. As I said, real life alters the lab test. And when something gets thrown at you, you have to be ready to deal with it. Life is not set up to work on your terms and on your schedule. And I'll say the last thing, in life, you need exposure, not protection. So you want to expose yourself. The more you get exposed, the stronger you become. As long as the exposure doesn't kill you, you get stronger. I mean, there are cliches all around that. So you need to get yourself out there and get exposed.
I like that. It's a nice way to finish, that is. Whereabouts can the listeners find you? Should they want to reach out to you and ask any questions?
Sure. So I'm on all the social media platforms. The one that I send people to the most is Instagram. My Instagram is at Dre Baldwin. I use Instagram stories all day long. So you want to see what I'm doing on a day to day and hear my thoughts on things. Instagram is the best place to do it, at Dre Baldwin. And I have my book, The Third Day. Can I tell people about that? I give them a free copy of it. All right. So this is my newest book, The Third Day, the decision that separates the pros from the amateurs. And Dave, we've been talking about this the whole time. I keep saying preparation, getting yourself prepared ahead of time. The third day is about that decision, preparing yourself ahead of time for the fact that, because the third day is about any situation in your life. Let's just say training for a sport. The first day, you feel great, is exciting, is new. Second day, a little bit less excitement, but it's still pretty new. By the third day already, it's a routine. By the third day, it's old. By the third day, it's not exciting anymore. The novelty's worn off. And now you have to decide, all right, what's going to get me to show up now? Because it's not excitement anymore. It's not motivation anymore. It's not newness. What's going to make you keep showing up every single day to that workout, to that training, to doing the same routine over and over and over again, which every professional does? That is the third day. What do you do in that moment? And professionals make the decision to show up. And that's why this is the decision that separates the pros from the amateurs. It's not a moment. It's not luck. It's not a talent. It is a choice. And each one of us gets to make that choice. I will give everyone who's listening a free copy of this book, paperback version. All you have to do is cover the shipping, and we will ship this to you wherever you are. Yes, we do ship internationally. We got the bonus bundle too. So if you want the digital or audio book, we have that. All of this is at thirddaybook.com. So it's spelled out, thirddaybook.com. Free copy of the book. Just cover the shipping.
Excellent. I need to read that. So yes. please feel free to send me one over as well. I'll put those notes. I'll put them in the show notes there for the listeners. And really appreciate your time and words of wisdom there. Big thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
It was a fascinating discussion, and it was a big reminder to me about how, as human beings, we can get comfortable. We can get stuck doing the same things time and time again. And as I mentioned in one of my previous podcasts, if you keep doing the same old things, you're going to get the same results. So it's hugely important that you go on to challenge yourself, to ensure that you've got a team around you that are challenging you and that are mentally preparing you for the battle, for the tournament or the match, when you will be under pressure. Because let's face it, there are going to be moments there when the spotlight will be right on you. And you're going to have to produce the goods at that point. So my question for you this week is, what can you do to challenge yourself to ensure that you raise your game? Give it some thought. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.